Ford is taking the world by storm with this F-150 Lightning pickup truck. And they made a very, very interesting announcement today on January 4th that I'm going to talk to Sam Abuelsamid, who's an automotive engineer and EV analyst for Guidehouse Insights about. So welcome to the interview, Sam.
Hey, Markham, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. So look, I've interviewed you before about the Lightning, and Ford's announcement basically is now they're going to basically double their production because it was so popular. They had many reservations, so they're going to double it to 150,000 units per year. And what's going on with Ford? I mean, this seems to be a pretty good news story.
Yeah, I mean, Ford's been an interesting case to watch when it comes to EVs over the last several years. They started off in early 2017. They announced plans to build a 300-mile EV crossover. That vehicle, was planned as something roughly akin to an electric Escape. And when they took a look at it, they realized that this is not a vehicle that was going to get anybody excited. So they actually pivoted the entire program, scrapped most of what they had done, started over again, and created the Mustang Mach-E, which they knew would get some people excited, but they didn't realize how excited they were going to get. And they tooled up for 50,000 units of annual capacity, and split evenly between North America and Europe. That turned out to be way less than the demand for this thing, and so they're now more than tripling production of that by next year to 200,000 units a year. And then they launched the F-150 Lightning. When they first announced it and first broke ground on the factory for that in mid 2020, they were planning on only building about 20,000 units a year. They quickly realized that there was a lot more interest in this thing than they anticipated. They doubled that capacity to 40,000 units a year. After they actually showed the truck publicly last spring, they doubled that again to 80,000 units last September. Now they're doubling it again to 150,000 units. And I think the only reason they're not going higher is they're probably capacity constrained on the batteries and other components that they can get until they get more of that production tooled up, which is going to be coming over the next several years with 3 new battery plants that they're building.
Now, this Ford put out a press release today about this, and buried in there is some very interesting comments by Kumar Galhotra, who's president of the Americas and International Markets Group within Ford. And one of the things that he said is that Ford's pulling out all the stops to scale our operations and increase production capacity. And they also are pledging that they, over the next 2 years, their aim is to emerge as the clear, and I quote, number 2 electric vehicle maker in North America, and then challenge the number 1 spot. They're going after Tesla.
Yeah.
I thought that is a pretty interesting pivot from Ford.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that Jim Farley, the CEO, has been saying for several months now, that they were targeting that initially that number 2 spot behind Tesla, and then eventually overtaking Tesla as they continue to ramp up their production. I think Ford's first EV, or first modern EV, was the Focus Electric about a decade ago, which was okay, but I mean, they basically took a Focus and stuffed in batteries anywhere they could, which left them with no cargo space and still not much range, and it was expensive. And it didn't really get anybody excited about it. What they've realized now was, they've come to the realization that if we build the products that people actually want to buy, full-size pickup trucks, sporty SUVs, then and get the all the things that people expect of those vehicles, and happen to make it electric, and get it at a price point that is comparable to the gasoline equivalents. Hey, what do you know? People are actually line up to buy this thing, and that's what's working out for them. And so now they're scrambling to get all the bottlenecks out of the system so they can build to meet demand, or what appears to be the demand for these vehicles.
Now, we were talking about Ford here, so this is anecdotal. We've got one example. But to me, what's happening at Ford actually illustrates what's going on in the entire global automotive industry. I mean, I interviewed Bloomberg NEF analyst uh, Colt, never mind, I can't remember his name, but
It's all right.
he told he told me that the global automotive industry last year was going to invest $240 billion in retooling and restructuring for electric vehicle manufacturing, which is astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
And this finally in North America with Ford, we're not, and I guess just GM as well. We're seeing the kind of that pivot to this frantic, investment to tool up production and so on. I think it's safe to say the EV age has come to the auto industry globally and in North America.
Yeah, this is actually a process that started several years ago. We saw back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe that the automakers and also a lot of suppliers, a lot of the big suppliers, realized that they were going to have to make the transition to electric, and they started substantially scaling back their investments in R&D for internal combustion powertrains. We had a lot of layoffs in the industry in 2019, 2018, 2019, primarily from the engineering groups that develop new engines, new transmissions, the stuff for legacy vehicles. And at the same time, they started hiring a lot of software engineers, a lot of electrical engineers, a lot of electronics engineers, people with the kinds of expertise that they need to build EVs. And so they've been staffing that up over the last several years. And now we're starting to see the fruits of that change, and they're making the big investments over between now and 2025. That $240 billion number you mentioned, that's roughly the total of what we're going to see in North America and Europe for the transition to both to develop these vehicles and to reconfigure manufacturing to produce the EVs, produce the batteries, produce motors. So all of that is a major pivot for the industry that there's been actually quietly an ongoing process for several years now.
So Sam, we're talking about the auto manufacturers now, the OEMs. What about the supply chain? Any chance that the OEMs are going to bring some of those manufacturing capabilities back in-house, things like battery plants, or are they still going to be, are we going to see a robust supply chain, which will be doing its own capital investment to pivot to electric vehicle manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly seeing suppliers make the same kind of shift. As I mentioned, a lot of suppliers have been divesting their traditional powertrain divisions. Continental last year spun off their engine and powertrain division. Bosch reconfigured to separate that division. Delphi did that a few years ago when it became Aptiv and Delphi Technologies. So this is an ongoing process, but at the same time, the automakers themselves are shifting back to more vertical integration, bringing a lot of that back in house, especially for batteries and motors. Previously, when they sold very few EVs and hybrids, they didn't see the need to have battery and motor technology as a core competency for the business because they weren't selling enough to justify the investment in the technology. Now that has completely turned 180 degrees. They know that they need to be the ones developing the new generations of battery technology, manufacturing those batteries, developing or building the motors. So GM, Ford, both of those are ramping up in-house production of the motors. The F-150 Lightning, the Mach-E, when it launched, it had motors from Borg Warner. The F-150 Lightning will have Ford-built electric motors. They are investing heavily in the battery plants, also even downstream in the supply chain for the raw materials for those batteries. Because the other thing that's happened over the past year, 2021, we saw a lot of disruption in the supply chain, in part because of the pandemic, but also various other geopolitical issues. And so they've seen the fragility of the supply chain. So they want to make sure that they have more control over the entire value chain, from the materials coming out of the ground, recycled materials, all the way into the finished product that goes to customers, and then taking back those products at the end of their lifespan and recycling batteries, recycling motor components to put it into new vehicles down the road.
Now, who were some of the winners and the losers thus far, Sam? Because we're seeing Toyota and Honda, and I'm a big Toyota fan. I mean, we've got a Toyota Matrix, so and have driven Toyotas for many years, but they seem to be a little slow. Honda's a little slow. Nissan, even though it has had the Leaf for a decade, it has been a little slow in making the pivot to other other models. So who are the winners and losers so far of the big brands?
Well, I hate to use the word winners and losers in this case because Toyota is obviously still doing very well, and they're selling an ever increasing number of hybrids. A higher percentage of their vehicles have hybrid powertrains. So they have I would say they have a different philosophy as to how to achieve the carbon neutrality goals. For Toyota, they're relying heavily on hybridization, to a lesser degree the same for Honda, but they're both also ramping up their investments in battery electric vehicles. And we've seen Toyota in recent months double their expected market share for and investment in EVs, targeting hitting 25% of their global sales being battery EVs by the end of the decade, which is roughly double what it was just a few months ago. Honda also, they're starting off with partnerships with GM, doing some stuff in-house, but I expect that we will see them also significantly increasing their investment and moving more towards battery EVs. So they're a little later down, in terms of time than most of the European and the U.S. based brands, but I think they will ultimately get there as well.
Great, Sam. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for this.
Always great to talk to you, Markham. Have a great day.